Good evening. Welcome to This Week in Turkey. Tonight we'll be speaking about the Qatar crisis and its probable impact on Turkey. And we're joined by Galip Dalay, who is a research director at the Al-Sharq Forum and also a columnist for the Turkish daily Qatar. Good evening, Mr. Dalay.
Good evening.
Thanks for joining us tonight. So let's start by, before we move on to the possible impact of this crisis on Turkey, let's start by talking about the background information. So you wrote in your column at Daily Qarar earlier in the week that what's currently unfolding in the Middle East or in the Gulf states, let's say, at the moment, is the Bahrainification of Qatar. So could you explain by telling us what exactly you meant by this?
Well, Qatar in recent years, and actually more than in recent years, was having a standing of its own when it comes to its regional policy, when it comes to its domestic policy within the GCC. Given that the GCC has 6 members, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Qatar, Oman, and Kuwait, usually 3 and 4 of these 6 members are very much taking a similar stance on major issues, particularly on the Arab Spring. We have seen on the Arab Spring Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and United Arab Emirates, and even Kuwait, who did not take sides in the recent row, but nevertheless on the Egyptian coup, it was on the same side with other Saudi-led coalition. They more or less, similar the same position. Oman is not falling within the orbit of Saudi Arabia. It has, to some extent, a neutral stance. And in this spectrum, Qatar has its own policy. It was much more pro-Arab Spring policy, much more pro-revolution policy across the Arab world. And that has created major crisis between Qatar and its GCC partners. I mean, we can trace back this to the Egyptian, what has happened in Egypt, the Egyptian coup, and the things that have unfolded since then. And this was very much disliked by Saudi Arabia and by United Arab Emirates. And they want to first to tame the Qatar and then to make sure that Qatar also falls in the line. And with this recent attempt, basically, when I said, the Saudi Arabia tried to turn Qatar into another Bahrain, what I meant is basically making Qatar is a very pliant state, complying by all the dictates or all the visions or all the regional power projections that comes from Saudi Arabia. Today, when you look at the relationship between Bahrain and the Saudi Arabia, it's a relationship of tutelage or the guardianship, basically in all major regional and international policy issues, security policy issues, national security policy issues. It is the Saudi Arabia that calls the shot, not the Bahrain. And Saudi Arabia wants to form such kind of relationship with Qatar as well too.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Dalay, you did an interview earlier this week with Rushan Çakır, again at Medyascope, but in Turkish. And during this interview, you mentioned that, I quote, "Actors are more decisive than countries or governments in the Middle East." And you said this obviously in reference to individual actors such as the Emir of Qatar. So can you explain the significance of these actors in relation to this crisis that's currently unfolding?
Well, particularly there's 2 figures that is the architect of the recent crisis. One of them is the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Mohammed bin Zayed. Another one is the Deputy Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman. You cannot understand this recent crisis without looking at the stance, the power projections, or the desires of these 2 actors. Both of them has their own reason when it comes to the recent blockade of Qatar. And for instance, it's a very bizarre situation that we're experiencing. We haven't heard any major things that is coming from the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia that is usually, that is normally when it comes to ranking is superior to his Deputy Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman. We haven't heard anything from the Mohammed bin Naif, who is the Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia. And in this latest role, the Deputy Crown Prince is also the son of the current king, whereas the Crown Prince is the nephew of it. And the Deputy Crown Prince wants to be nominated as the next king before his father dies as well too. And you see all this blunder in Yemen, all this tough stance in Qatar, all this power projections, all this like ambitious domestic policy projection is also geared towards this end. So this is in one way, this is a power play between himself and also the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Nayef. And likewise, the Abu Dhabi, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Mohammed bin Zayed, is also effectively acting as the leader of United Arab Emirates and has a very different standing than Qatar when it comes to Muslim Brotherhood, political Islam, on the crisis in Yemen. So both of them had a very interesting relationship when it comes to Qatar, both Mohammed bin Zayed and Mohammed bin Salman. And these two figures are the architects behind this recent crisis.
Finally, Mr. Dalay, who do you think is this crisis actually putting in the spotlight? Is it Iran or Turkey? And let me add another question, a follow-up question to this. What are the exact reasons for Turkey to be worried at this moment?
Well, I mean, it is both Turkey and Iran actually under the spotlight. And when you look at the discourse coming from the Gulf, it is more and more, adopting a very national discourse as well too. Yesterday, the Foreign Minister of United Arab Emirates called Qatar seeking the aid from two non-Arab states, alluding to Iran and Turkey. So when you look at this United Arab Emirates and Egypt and Saudi blocs, they are using the Islamism card to the Western public opinion or to the West. When they speak to the West, they make reference to the Qatar's so-called shady relationship with Islamist movement in order to justify their movements. When they try to appeal to the Arab world, recently given the very anti-Iranian feelings prevailing among the Arabs in the Gulf, but also in the broader Arab world, they are trying to more focus on the Qatar's so-called links with Iran. And now a third element is being added to this is Qatar having a relationship with non-Arab countries on a matter that concerns the Arab world. So this is an attempt to justify this, what they are doing towards Qatar. So in this regard, well, both Turkey and Iran has been put under the spotlight for different reasons. Iran, obviously, because one of the major accusations was leveled against Qatar was its ties with Iran, and one of the things that put Turkey under the spotlight was in terms of position, Turkey and Qatar has been very much taking very similar position almost on all major regional issues. And secondly, Turkey has a military base in Qatar, and Turkey has recently authorized the further deployment of the military to this base in Qatar, and also further enhancing the military training between Turkey and Qatar. So for these reasons, both will see Turkey and Iran being under the spotlight. And then lastly, how this crisis will impact Turkey, Well, at two level is very important. One of them, Turkey has a very hard time right now to balance its very deep and extensive relationship with Qatar with its newly developing relationship with Saudi Arabia particularly. Because in recent years, Turkey tried to cultivate also a good relation with Saudi Arabia, to some extent with Emirates as well too. So now Turkey has to tread a very fine line. This is the first challenge. Secondly, let's say if the Qatar comes to this pressure, that means further weakening of Turkey's regional standing, because Qatar is the closest ally that Turkey has in the region, and Turkey has a base there as well too. So in this regard, Turkey feels that it has to both maintain good relation, it has to maintain a fine line by not completely alienating the Saudi Arabia, which is a very hard task to achieve at this stage, while at the same time it makes sure that it throws its weight firmly behind Qatar.
Mr. Dalay, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
You are welcome.
We'll continue by having a quick look at Turkey-Qatar relations.
During a state visit by the Qatari Emir in December 2014, Turkey and Qatar set up a bilateral cooperation and consultation group called the Turkey-Qatar High Strategic Committee in order to foster military and strategic cooperation between the two countries. They also signed agreements on military training, defense industry cooperation, and the deployment of Turkish armed forces in Qatari territory. As a consequence of these agreements, certain Turkish Army, Navy and Special Forces personnel have been stationed temporarily at a Qatari military base since October 2015. The base, which has a capacity of up to 5,000 troops, already hosts 200 Turkish soldiers and is projected to be a permanent Turkish base. With regard to the political alliance between the two countries, Turkey and Qatar have long been on the same side of the regional conflicts. After their support for the Egyptian revolution, they both condemned the military coup and its leader, Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. On the other hand, while they both refused to classify Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas as terrorist organizations unlike many other countries in the region, Turkey and Qatar both backed rebels fighting against the regime and Bashar al-Assad in Syria. In contrast to the position of the Arab League, these two countries are also following a similar strategy of balance in their relations with Iran. Qatari Emir Al Thani's strong support for the Turkish government and President Erdogan during and after the July 15th coup attempt further strengthened the political partnership between two. Under the AKP government, the economic relations between the two countries have also developed significantly. The trade volume between Turkey and Qatar has risen from $21 million in 2000 to $710 million in 2016. Turkey's main export product to Qatar is iron and steel, followed by electrical machinery, motor vehicles, and home textile products. Turkey mainly imports natural gas, plastics, and chemical derivatives from Qatar. With regard to the investments, the main sector in which Turkish companies are most active is the construction sector, followed by consultancy services. Turkish contracts rank 7th among all contractors undertaking construction projects in Qatar. During the first quarter of 2017, Turkish companies have undertaken 128 projects, adding up to a total value of $14.2 billion. Turkey's main aim is to attract the direct investments of the world's 14th biggest investor nation. For now, Qatar's investments in Turkey add up to $18 billion, a relatively small amount compared to the country's $335 billion investments all over the world. Qatar made 3 important purchases last year and bought Finansbank for $2.7 billion, 40% of the shares of Bank for $224 billion, and the media giant Digiturk for $1.2 billion.
Our friend Leora Morhaim did an exclusive interview this week with Stefan Kinser from Brown University about American interventionism in the Middle East.
I moved to Istanbul as the New York Times bureau chief after I'd spent a number of years covering Latin America. Well, Latin America, of course, is the cradle of magic realism, and I always thought that I had been at the world center of conspiracy theories and fantasies in Latin America. Then I moved to Turkey, and I realized I was moving up into another league. So it certainly is true that in the minds of many people in the Middle East, many conspiracies are out there. On the other hand, although it can be dangerous to be too much of a conspiracy theorist, there's also the opposite danger. You don't want to be too much of a non-conspiracy theorist. The fact is that not everything is as it seems to be, and there are forces at work behind the scenes. Those forces definitely have shaped the U.S. relationship with the Middle East. So, yes, people in the Middle East tend to be conspiracy-oriented, and they often see conspiracies where none exist. They do also, however, see conspiracies where they do exist. And in the case of U.S. Operations in the Middle East, to be a non-conspiracy theorist would be to miss some fundamental facts of history.
Following Ankara's refusal to allow German lawmakers access to their soldiers at the Incirlik air base in southern Turkey, the German cabinet decided on Wednesday to withdraw their troops from the base.
Germany's cabinet decided on Wednesday on the withdrawal of troops from the Incirlik air base in southern Turkey following Ankara's refusal to allow German lawmakers access to its soldiers there. Despite the German Foreign Minister Sigmar Gabriel's visit on Monday in Ankara, in order to ease the tension between the two states, Turkey has refused to allow German lawmakers, saying that Berlin needs to improve its attitude towards Turkey first. However, Turkey has granted German lawmakers access to its Konya base. Germany has more than 250 military personnel stationed at Incirlik as part of the international mission against the Islamic State. German Defense Minister Ursula von der Leyen said they would relocate to Jordan's Azraq air base. Ankara reacted angrily to German and European concerns over a domestic crackdown after a failed coup attempt last July. Turkey also protested Germany's decision to grant asylum to Turkish soldiers it accuses of taking part in the coup. On the other hand, Berlin is demanding the release of jailed German-Turkish journalist Deniz Yücel on charges of terrorist propaganda and inciting violence. Berlin-based journalist Değer Akal commented on the reasons and possible implications of the withdrawal of the German troops from the Incirlik air base.
But what occurred during these past few months has been quite challenging for the German government, because in Germany the German troops in Incirlik, the mandate which is given by the German parliament foresees also the inspection of German troops in Turkey, and Turkey not permitting German MPs to visit Incirlik has been a great challenge for the German government and has put pressure on the German government to withdraw its troops. The parliament was very decisive, and actually we were expecting a decision 2 weeks ago after Merkel and Erdogan met in NATO. But apparently some ministers, and especially Minister Sigmar Gabriel, the foreign minister, insisted on visiting Turkey and talking this issue with Çavuşoğlu, the Turkish foreign minister. But apparently the differences are too much, and Turkey is not willing to give an allowance to the German MPs. So I think the German government had no other choice than withdrawing its troops. In withdrawing its troops from Incirlik and taking this decision today. I guess it will have great implications on both bilateral relations, but also on Turkey's relations with the EU. It will have it will also impact the economic relations between two countries. As you know, the customs union agreement was meant, to be modernized, which has great importance for Turkey, and apparently we will see a reluctant EU on several issues like the customs union, like other trade issues, like other bilateral political issues, because withdrawing troops, if a country which is one of the leading EU countries has to withdraw its troops due to a political crisis from a country, I don't think there can be any expectation that those countries will support Turkey's EU process in any way. And on the other hand, Turkish-German bilateral relations will also be quite challenging from now on. I think for Germany it's very important to do its best to withdraw its soldiers safely from Turkey and to transfer them to Jordan. And I think Germany is now focusing on this, which will take at least 2 months, most probably, because we're talking about 10,000 tons and more than 200 containers which have to be relocated to Jordan. It's a difficult path, but I think the German government took this decision to withdraw its troops from Incirlik. So this would not continue to be an issue between Turkey and Germany, constantly raised by Turkey whenever there's a political crisis.
Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces captured a neighborhood in the eastern part of Raqqa city on Wednesday after heavy clashes with the Islamic State militants.
The SDF fighters entered the Mashlab neighborhood in eastern Raqqa after bombing ISIS positions with heavy artillery. After brief clashes, the terrorists evacuated the neighborhood. We are now in control of Al-Mashlab in a first progress within the battle for Raqqa city, SDF officer Habun Osman told Ara News. Also on Wednesday, the Syrian Democratic Forces captured the Tel Harkal district in the west of Raqqa. Tel Harkal was a key base for ISIS terrorists in the western suburb of Raqqa. The area was liberated today by our forces, SDF Operations Room said in a statement. Dozens of ISIS terrorists were killed by SDF fire on Wednesday, Officer Osman told Ara News, without giving exact numbers of casualties. This comes just one day after US-backed SDF troops launched a major operation to liberate the city of Raqqa from ISIS radicals. On Tuesday, the SDF announced the official start of the operation to liberate the city of Raqqa from Islamic State's militants.
The passing of the production reform draft from the Turkish Parliament's Industry Commission caused heated debate last week due to a controversial clause about the future of Turkey's olive groves.
Last week, Turkey witnessed a fierce debate over the fate of its olive trees during the vote on the production reform draft in the Turkish Parliament. The production reform draft, which opens the way for the establishment of industrial facilities in olive grove areas, had passed from the Parliament Industry Commission. According to this, areas in which 15 olive trees per decade are not present will not be legally identified as olive groves. This figure is 3 olive trees or culture per decade in Italy and Spain. Producers, politicians, environmentalists and citizens have reacted to this new regulation regarding the olive groves. Olive producers have said that this arrangement is a death sentence for olive trees. It would not save us. Turkey's famous pop star Tarkan also reacted by sharing a post on social media saying that the greatest blessing of a country is its nature. The olive trees are the treasuries of Anatolia. Don't hurt the olive trees for annuity. Faruk Özlü, Minister of Science, Industry and Technology, commented on Tarkan's response to the olive grove, saying, "Does Tarkan have olive groves? What is he going to do with olive groves? We love Tarkan's songs. Tarkan should sing his songs." AKP's Group Vice President Mustafa Elitaş announced that the regulations concerning the olive groves in the production reform draft will be withdrawn to the Commission to be reviewed at the committee. The arrangements for opening up the olive grove areas by directly or indirectly changing the olive cultivation law have been rejected 6 times since 2002.
Now let's have a look at what's on in Istanbul next week.
Jonathan Caspar and Oksya are in town. Now in the 20th year of his career, Oksya continues to release his records under his own label, Diversion Music. He is known for remix collaborations with Agoria, Misketin. Recently, he remixed Moby's popular song, Why Does My Heart Feel So Bad? Before Oksya, you can listen also to Jonathan Caspar's techno-based playlist at cafes. Pere Museum presents 2 interesting exhibitions, Double Think Double Vision and Jose Sancho. Double Think Double Vision exhibition title alludes to George Orwell's seminal work 1984 and presents a selection that includes Tracy Emin, Marcel Zama, Anselm Kiefer, Bruce Nauman, Raymond Pettibon, and Thomas Ruh, as well as Turkish artists tracing the steps of pluralistic thought through works of art. Jose Sancho, who is recognized as one of the leading sculptors of Costa Rica, pursues a broad range of themes in his works, yet nature is always the most essential starting point. created by art historian and critic Maria Enriqueta Gardia Iglesias. The exhibition focuses on the artist, animal and figure themes. You can visit both exhibitions until August 6th.
That's all from This Week in Turkey. Thanks for tuning in and hope to see you again next Friday at 9 p.m. Bye.